moments in football that live longer than the men who played them. Moments that refuse to fade, no matter how many decades pass. For anyone who watched the 1970s Steelers, the memory is still fresh. The cold air of Old Three Rivers Stadium, the smell of wet grass, the sound of helmets colliding like thunder, and a crowd holding its breath as a ball hung in the air. That night didn't just define a game, it defined an era. And at the heart of that memory stood a man whose calm eyes and quiet grace carried the weight of a city. A man who turned chaos into miracles. He wasn't the loudest or the flashiest, but when the Steelers needed a saviour, he was there. He ran with a rhythm that looked almost poetic, yet hit defenders with the force of a train. To the fans who watched him, every carry was a story of courage, of balance, of belief. It wasn't just football, it was hope wrapped in black and gold. And even now, when people talk about the greatest plays ever seen, his name always rises. Franco Harris, the unstoppable force who ran straight into history.
Before the cheers of Pittsburgh echoed his name, there was a young man at Penn State whose calm demeanor hid a storm inside. Franco Harris wasn't born a superstar, he was molded through discipline and quiet determination. He wasn't the loudest in the locker room or the fastest on the stopwatch, but the moment he carried the football, something changed. There was balance, grace, and brutal power all at once. Joe Paterno, his college coach, once said Franco had a runner's soul and a defender's heart, and those words would follow him into history. When the Pittsburgh Steelers selected him in the first round of the 1972 NFL Draft, the city didn't yet know that its identity was about to change. The team had never won a championship. The city itself was built on steel, sweat, and struggle, and in Franco, Pittsburgh found a reflection of itself. He ran like the mills worked, relentless, steady, and with no sign of slowing down. From his very first season, he wasn't just making plays, he was making believers. Every yard he gained, every hit he absorbed, felt like a message to a working-class city that refused to quit. And then came that moment, the one every football fan, young or old, can still see when they close their eyes. December 23rd, 1972. The Steelers were seconds from elimination. The crowd was silent. A desperate pass deflected into the air, and for a heartbeat, time froze. Then, out of nowhere, Franco appeared, like destiny wearing number 32. He scooped that ball inches from the turf and ran it into the end zone, giving birth to what the world would call the Immaculate Reception. That single play didn't just win a game, it resurrected a franchise. In that instant, Franco Harris became more than a running back. He became a symbol of faith for a city that had long forgotten how to dream. Pittsburgh wasn't just cheering for a touchdown, it was cheering for itself. From that moment on, the legend had begun, and the quiet man with the powerful stride became the heartbeat of a dynasty that was only just beginning to roar. By the mid-1970s, the Pittsburgh Steelers weren't just a team, they were an empire. From the cold bleachers of Three Rivers to the rooftops of the city's steel mills, Pittsburgh had found its identity in black and gold. And in the center of it all was Franco Harris, the man who ran like time itself, patient, powerful, unstoppable. Every Sunday, the stadium would shake as he lined up behind Terry Bradshaw, eyes locked, heart steady. The crowd didn't just expect magic anymore, they knew it was coming. The Steelers' offense wasn't built around flash, it was built around force. And Franco was that force. He didn't dance or hesitate, he glided through chaos with an elegance that didn't belong in such a violent game. Defenders said tackling him felt like trying to catch wind in your hands. He'd absorb hits, bounce off bodies, and somehow keep moving, his knees churning like pistons. There was something almost spiritual about the way he ran. Calm face, shoulders low, helmet slicing through the cold. From 1974 to 1979, the Steelers became the team everyone feared and respected. 4 Super Bowls in 6 seasons, and in every one of them, Franco left his mark. In Super Bowl IX, he rushed for over 150 yards and was named MVP, carrying Pittsburgh to its first championship. In Super Bowl XIII, when the lights were brightest, he ran like destiny couldn't wait. He wasn't the loudest voice in the locker room, but when the game was on the line, he was always the answer. For Pittsburgh, Franco represented more than touchdowns. He represented consistency, reliability, and quiet power, the same traits that defined the city itself. Fans didn't just watch him, they trusted him. Kids wore his number, fathers compared his grit to the old steel workers, and grandfathers called him the gentleman in armor. By 1979, as the Steelers lifted their 4th Lombardi trophy, Franco Harris stood not just as a player, but as a pillar of an entire era. He was proof that greatness didn't need noise, it needed purpose. And for nearly a decade, his purpose was simple: run through anyone who tried to stop Pittsburgh's rise. Behind every hit, every touchdown, and every roar of the crowd, there was a man who carried himself with quiet grace. Off the field, Franco Harris was the opposite of what people expected. In a sport filled with trash talk and ego, he was calm, almost gentle. He shook hands with fans after games, signed every autograph, and never once acted like he was bigger than the city that adored him. He wasn't a superstar trapped in fame. He was a Pittsburgh man who just happened to wear shoulder pads. His teammates used to say Franco was the kind of player who made everyone around him better, not just through performance, but through presence. When he walked into the locker room, there was no noise, no chaos, just calm confidence. He never shouted, never bragged, but everyone knew who the real anchor was. He carried the Steelers' spirit quietly, like a man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. And then there were his fans. They weren't just supporters, they were believers. They called themselves the Franco's Italian Army, a group of loyal fans who wore helmets, waved flags, and marched through Pittsburgh streets chanting his name. You could see them in the stands, waving banners that read, "Run, Franco, run." Every touchdown he scored felt like a victory for the entire city, not just the team. When he crossed the goal line, people didn't just cheer, they stood up, because they knew they were watching something rare, a player who combined humility with dominance. Even opposing players respected him. They'd say he was the hardest to bring down, but also the easiest to talk to after the game. He'd shake their hand, pat their shoulder, and walk away smiling, as if all that violence had never happened. That was Franco, a man who played a brutal game with the soul of a gentleman. To Pittsburgh, he wasn't just a running back. He was a reminder of what character looked like. A man who showed that strength wasn't about anger, it was about control. In a decade full of noise, Franco Harris was the quiet thunder that still echoes through football's history. As the 1980s approached, time began to do what no defense ever could. It slowed Franco Harris down. The man who had carried cities on his shoulders for nearly a decade was now running against something faster than any linebacker: the years themselves. But even as his legs lost a step, his presence never faded. When Franco lined up in the backfield, you could still feel that electricity, that familiar hum in the air, as if the crowd knew they were witnessing the end of something sacred. When he finally left Pittsburgh in 1984, the city didn't throw a parade or a farewell tour. It didn't need to. Every street, every bar, every living room already carried his memory. The black and gold banners still hung, the number 32 still painted on kids' helmets, because Franco wasn't just a player who wore a uniform. He was the uniform. He had become part of the city's identity, woven into its skyline like the rivers that surrounded it. To this day, you can't talk about Pittsburgh without his name slipping into the conversation. He retired quietly, just as he had lived, humble, gracious, and thankful. While other athletes chased spotlights and microphones, Franco chose community. He built programs for young athletes, gave back to charities, and never stopped representing the same blue-collar values that had made him a hero. And when he spoke about his career, he never said "I." He always said "we," because in his mind, every yard he ran belonged to the people of Pittsburgh. The years rolled on, and football changed. The hits got softer, the rules got tighter, and the game became more polished, more commercial. But for those who had watched the Golden Age, the name Franco Harris still carried the weight of something real. His immaculate reception wasn't just a play, it was a turning point, a symbol of belief for an entire generation. That single moment has been replayed thousands of times, yet every time you watch it, your heart skips the same beat, your breath catches the same way. And for a second, you're back in 1972, watching destiny bounce off the turf and land in Franco's hands. Even after he was gone, his shadow remained. His statue stands in Pittsburgh International Airport, frozen mid-catch, greeting travellers who walk by with a quiet reminder of what greatness once looked like. Fans still stop, smile, and whisper, "I remember that play." Because Franco Harris didn't just run with the ball. He ran with the hopes of a city that had learned how to believe again. His legacy isn't in numbers or records, it's in emotion. It's in the fathers who tell their sons about the glory days. It's in the grandfathers who still wear those old Steelers jackets and remember every game, every drive, every touchdown. Franco Harris wasn't just the most unstoppable force of 1979. He was proof that strength and grace can exist in the same heartbeat. And even now, decades later, the echo of his runs still lives in the sound of a cheering crowd and the pride of a city that refuses to forget him. If you remember those Sundays, the roar of the crowd, the golden helmets, the feeling that football was more than a game, then you just relived the era of Franco Harris. Share this video with someone who remembers that magic too. Hit like if those memories still make your heart race, and subscribe to NFL Legends to keep the stories of real football alive, because legends like Franco Harris never stop running.